Around 8 months ago, I began development on my very first game in Unity, a combat RPG set in a fantasy world, filled with unique NPCs, enemies, quests, and bosses. And after 2 weeks, I gave up entirely. Until now, my interest rekindled when I accidentally opened Unity. I decided it was just about time to restart progress on my game. Unfortunately, I had forgotten everything. Luckily for me, there are quite literally millions of Unity tutorials on the internet, and every single one of them told me one thing: complete a small project before moving on to a big one. And so, since I've played a little bit of Stardew Valley, I wanted to make my small game similar to the mini games during the Stardew Fair. I booted up Unity, and after building some simple movement and collisions, I sketched up what I actually wanted my game to be. My basic idea was to have 3 pots in a room, each randomly generating crops, and it would be the player's job to sort these into the correct corresponding shipping bin. After 1 minute passes, the screen would turn black and the score would be displayed. Happy with this, I put together a to-do list and reopened Unity. The first thing you need for a character is a sprite sheet, so I opened Photoshop and pixel by pixel created my very own Stardew character. Unfortunately, while I wasn't looking, I accidentally also drew every single cosmetic in the game, and not knowing how to use this piece of technology, I opted instead to use this simple sprite sheet of Abigail that I found on the internet. The player is now Abigail. After completing the animations that definitely work and added a shadow as just a bit of polish, I began working on the crops. I needed them to be randomly picked from a cauliflower, potato, or parsnip. So I made some logic, and yep, that's what I meant actually. But the next thing on the list was a mouse to follow my mouse. So I opened up Photoshop and pixel by pixel created my very own mouse. Concerned Ape better be concerned about this copyright infringement. I ended up almost getting the mouse working, just following a bit far away, so I struggled to fix the issue for half an hour before realizing the mouse was following with the background and decided it wasn't worth my time. Next on the list was detection for when the player was close enough to a plant to pick the produce. This sounded simple enough in my head, so I created some boxes that the player would have to be touching. Now, just some very simple logic. This took me 2.5 hours. How am I so badly lacking in wrinkles? After way too much hassle, I eventually got it to work, and if I picked one piece of produce, after 2 seconds it would respawn as a random different one. And with this massive hurdle overcome, I would now need to create a very simple inventory system. Since the player can only hold 1 item at a time, I needed a single item frame. Unfortunately, there's nothing like this at all in Stardew, so I had to completely steal one off of Concerned Ape. He's gonna be fuming about this one. I imported these stolen goods into Unity and got them working as like kind of a UI. I don't know. If I'm being honest, at this point, I had no idea this existed. The next thing to do was to create the signs so players would actually know which shipping bin does what. So I opened up Photoshop and completed the incredible task of drag potato onto the sign. I brought them into Unity, and that was, I don't think, no. Also, the shadow forgot to be transparent, so I redid it all and now it looks good. Just like me if I get 10,000 subs. Now it was time for the shipping bins. I brought them into the project, and after coding some simple logic, they didn't work. So I remade it, and this somehow broke my inventory as well. I think this might be falling apart. I luckily clutched up and managed to do what did that potato? And finally, it was time for the end screen and score. I made a square very large and turned it black, then sent it 10,000 light years into the void, only able to return when the minute was up. I also hooked up a counter to score the player on how many produce they shipped correctly. Unfortunately, I made the variable a string, not an integer, so getting 2 correct would score 1010 instead of 20. The solution was luckily very simple, just change the variable to an integer. But I'm a dumbass, and instead just made the score count in O's. So this is what you see when you finish. Good job. I'm very proud of you. Now, an incredibly experienced veteran in the game development community, I'll be slowly chipping away at my larger project. If you are wondering, I'm not going to be releasing this game to the public because it has 60 seconds of content and almost every single asset was completely stolen. Also, please subscribe as we're getting relatively close to 10k. But wait, my game isn't quite finished. It needs that final touch, that last piece of polish to call it complete. Looking back at my Abigail sprite sheet, there's an animation of her playing the flute. Putting it in the game, it looks absolutely perfect.